Welcome to Planet Poet Words in Space. I'm your host, Sharon Israel, and my guest today is the award-winning poet and activist, Mary Gilliland. Pamela Marche Pierce, Planet Poet's Poet at Large, will also join us later in the program. Here's Mary's bio. Mary Gilliland is the author of 2 award-winning poetry collections, The Ruined Walled Castle Garden, 2020, and The Devil's Fools, 2022. Her latest collection, Ember Days, is forthcoming from Codhill Press in 2024. Mary's poems are widely published in print and online literary journals, and most recently anthologized in Wild Gods, the Ecstatic in Contemporary Poetry and Prose, and Nuclear Impact, Broken Atoms in Our Hands. After college, Mary apprenticed to Gary Snyder in the Sierra foothills, where she studied Buddhism and helped to build a wood-framed public school. Mary retired early from teaching at Cornell in order to devote herself to poetry. Hi, Mary.
Hi, Sharon. It's a pleasure to be joining you in Words in Space for Planet Poet.
Thank you so much. It's great to have you here. Mary, let's dive in. Would you read from your poetry collection, The Devil's Fools?
Yes. Well, this poem is called The Adversary, and that noun is the old style nomenclature for the devil when you don't want to say that word. So the adversary, I think, was first identified in the book of Job. He was the one sent to rock Job around for a while. Yeah, adversary. It's Satan writes the lines for Faust, whose mentor in crime invented crime, whose I will not serve under the alias Lucifer, bore him into a role eternal, all the world the devil's platform. We give him no billing on the marquee, no neon bulbs spell out his name, but he's everywhere, underground as though injected into basalt to mineralize, about to sprout the taste buds of his ready tongue. If we slip off our earbuds, perhaps if we slip them on. Faust might get the billing, but a hapless man's movements hardly matter. He'll go out the way he came in. Remember Frankenstein, the scientist? Frankenstein registers in our roster the monster.
That's great. That's Mary Gilliland reading from her collection, The Devil's Fools, and that was The Adversary. I find that The Adversary is more frightening than calling the entity the devil, because it's unusual to have that word. But I love the way you combine history and literary history with Faust, and then talk about earbuds. I just love that, Mary. So, Mary, is Faust one of the devil's fools?
Oh, yes, he's an iconic devil's fool. I mean, he's known for making that bargain that if he could get what he wanted, the devil can have his soul. But honestly, he's kind of representative because, I would say that you discover reading the book that there are very few who are not the devil's fools walking around here on the planet. There is one other poem that mentions the devil stops with his bag of gold, wants only one thing in return, so that's a literal reference to a very common old legend.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I love when you say he's everywhere, underground, as though injected into basalt to mineralize. Can you talk about that a little bit? That's so alchemic and so hellish, right?
Yes. Well, he's supposedly relegated to the lower world, the underworld. And in once upon a time, there was a whole theology of what what were called humans' base emotions, anything that was
Ah,
negative was the base. And so just think about, the bedrock of us is in a way our lower selves, in that world. What was good was projected to be higher and something to reach for. And then it was also in the head, which kind of led to a disjunction, head over heart, all these polarities. And I think poetry is a wonder because it unifies those antinomies. It removes their opposition to each other. It's large enough to contain ambiguity and respect it for the
great.
lower and higher. Yeah.
That's almost like Keats's negative capability, where
Uh-huh.
you can contain everything within the scope of what you're doing.
Yes.
That's so interesting. And the book title, could you talk about why you titled the book "The Devil's Fools"? And the adversary is such an apt take on that. Was this,
Mhm.
how did you conceive the book? Could you talk
Okay.
about that?
Well, in a sense, the title is chthonic, or it's ancient. This manuscript had a long history and originally was titled The Devil's Fools way back. I mean, and it was published November 1st, 2022, but it had been a finalist in many national contests for over a 20-year period. So it was lovely to emerge from the finalist pool after swimming there a
Oh,
long
wow.
time. So the manuscript evolved, and um, I think over time, as I would revise it, and some poems would drop out and others would get rearranged, that I began to know, for example, that Cain, our first murderer, had to be in this book. And the poem ends with a poem in which we find out what happens to Eve afterwards when she leaves the garden. Um, and so, yeah, yeah.
Over 20 years, you've won finalists. You rated finalist. And did you revise after each of these
I
commendations?
did. I did. And I wasn't like constantly sending the book around. I wouldn't do it all the time, but I mean it was once a finalist in the National Poetry Series and the Tampa Review Prize and just a whole lot of ones. Sometimes it was a drastic rearrangement I would make. At the beginning, it was actually very long. It was almost like a 90-page manuscript. And so it had 5 sections. I just thought breathing space in between the poems. And over the years that changed, but it almost always had sections. And then impulsively, I really wanted to do a book where you could just read continuously without having a break. And so what I did was I designed it topically to concentrate on something for a series of poems and then find a way to flow into another idea or topic, or concern of the book. Another thing I'll just say is, as The Devil's Fools was evolving, I first heard Mahler performed, Gustav Mahler. I am not a classical musical specialist, but I know very little about it really. I played Beethoven all the time in college, but that was sort of the extent of it.
Uh-huh.
So here I was sitting and listening to a symphony performing Mahler's Fourth Symphony, and I found out about him, and he wanted to get the whole world into a symphony, both the beauty and the disjunction, and the highbrow and the folkloric. And that became my aim for The Devil's Fools,
Wonderful.
really.
Well, we'll channel Mahler and tell him that. I'm sure he'll be very pleased. Mary, would you read the bargain for us from The Devil's Fools?
All right. Yes, this is a favorite. The bargain. I forgive the young doe for eating the black-eyed Susans, for hosta tops bitten just as the flower heads formed. So intelligent, she waited for the sweetest mouthfuls. She's the first deer to stand, to let me sing to her. A few brief chews, then she lifts her head like a bird, walks off calmly into the woods after swallowing fallen pears. This is a good house. We let out a milk snake curled in the basement and moved in. 5 years ago, a stag browsed 6-foot burdock. Above their spikes, antlers rose before he bolted. The animals go before us, prints marking wood's edge and trail, and the fair trade of the forest, lettuce and green beans. Fence wire bends where cleft hooves sank, darkening moist loam.
Mary, that's so beautiful. That was
Thank you, Sharon.
Mary Gilliland reading her poem, The Bargain. This is a very different bargain. This is not a Faustian bargain.
Well, we still have cleft hooves in it.
Oh, okay. Oh my goodness. That's great. It's such beautiful imagery that carries such power with it.
Hmm.
Uh,
I I actually don't grow vegetables anymore because the deer population has increased so much.
mhm.
Yeah.
Mary, you are known for your nature poetry, your environmental poetry. When did you
Mhm.
start writing nature poems?
When? Oh, I think I must have always been writing them. When I was in my 20s, I had my late 20s, I think I was 29, and a small letterpress Ithaca house published a book of mine called Gathering Fire. And at that time, I was so lucky. I live and I taught at Cornell, and they have a visiting professorship program where someone is selected and comes. I think the requirement is to visit the campus twice within a 6-year period. Anyway, Adrienne Rich was invited, and my book had just come out, and she remarked to me, "You're really good with nature," which I had never
Ah,
really paid attention to. Like that's just a natural I think it's natural to me to write nature poems because I just spend a lot of time in nature. I always have. It was my solace. Well, I was raised in an extremely religious household, and then I came to a point where I was lost, I kind of lost the whole belief structure. And what I would do is I would go in the vacant woodland lots in the town where I lived and just spend time there and watch the water, watch the creek, watch the little tadpoles that were going in it. So I at various times in my life when I've hit bottom or, it's really something. I just go for a long walk. I deliberately live right next to the woods, which is why the deer overrun overrun my place, but I can walk up my back door and there's a 3 mile rails to trails right out there.
lovely.
It's yeah, I think nature keeps us going. It's always reproducing itself and blossoming and persisting.
Helps us renew ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mary, could you talk a little bit about your apprenticeship with Gary Snyder?
Oh, well,
I mean, he's a West Coast a nature icon.
yes, he is. Yes, he is. And I was young and always loved Gary's poetry. My first job was in our public library. So I was a page at the library. I got to cover the new books that came in. And at that time, new books were coming in by Allen Ginsberg and Gary Snyder. And so I would put the plastic covers on them and the little numbers and check them out. So he was just a really great inspiration and also an inspiration for Buddhism, which I became a Zen Buddhist when I was in college as well. And my husband and I, not we would go to any reading Gary gave that we were within the vicinity. And so after a wild party, I had done a lot of dancing, and I was telling Gary that it was after one of his poetry readings. I was telling him we really wanted to learn carpentry, and we had college degrees, and we were not allowed to get apprenticeship training, say at Manpower, where at that time you could become a registered carpenter or an electrician or whatever. And so it was very frustrating because that was the goal was to work with your hands and then write poetry as a, balance, right? And so where he lived at that time was in need of labor, and so we got invited to go there, and we stayed out in California for about 18 months.
Wow.
And I learned a great deal. I mean, I learned quite a bit about carpentry, also about Buddhism. The concentration was not in poetry per se, what we were spending our time. But I also learned, Gary told me about the linguists and the books that were the history of the English language. And I took that up and I studied them really thoroughly. And it's just one of the contributions to my skill with words, I think. In college, I had learned Anglo-Saxon. I was always fascinated with the old stuff, whatever it was. And he also, Gary gave me a little book by H.D., the 20th century American poet.
Sure.
And I started reading everything by her I could get, and it was hard to get at that time, and just memorizing it. And you see, I'm not schooled. I don't have formal schooling in poetry, and the way I have really learned it was about language, just fascination with language. But B would be I immerse myself in a writer's work.
That's
So
wonderful for all our poets to know who don't
yeah.
have formal education, right?
No, no, but we just talked with Gary again last week, so it's really been a wonderful,
Oh, wonderful.
long-term inspiration. Yeah.
Well, speaking of language, Mary, would you read another poem from the Devil's Fools, The Language of Bees?
Okay. All right. This is towards the end of the book. Uh, The Language of Bees. On the rooftop garden, over the gallfly's home, the bald-faced hornet sips nectar. The shag rug of florets covers her feet. Mated already, surviving, she'll overwinter in litter, then pulp wood in her mouth for a pendant gray paper nest. The larvae will close their own cells. The year carries its freight, it's September. At the gambrel of goldenrod plumes, she rocks in the sun, pine fragrance stirring. The slick yellow and black stripes of her abdomen pulse bend to her mouth music.
That's so beautiful. Mary, the language of bees, there's a lot of hornets here and gallflies. And where do the bees come in?
Well, the bees themselves are actually in a whole different poem in the book, but I have the word bees here because that's how the average person thinks about all these flying insects, whether they're, yellow jackets and also thinks of them as honeybees. I mean, and there's actually so many species of solitary bees. And so that was kind of my concession in the title, to make it an attractive poem that people would want to find out about what is the language of bees. But it's true, I was watching a hornet, and I myself did not know this. Okay, I'm self-taught with nature as well. And the day after I graduated from college, I started learning the native wildflowers. After many, many years, I learned all the herbs, the flowers brought me to the insects because I would see these fascinating insects on one kind of flower or another. And so I actually have a book of to key out the insects. So I did not know what I was observing as I stopped by this big goldenrod, but
So
I found out
wonderful.
later.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
It's such a precise, it's such a scientific element to this. This the precision of your observation really works in the poem. I wanted to ask you if you could read one more poem from the Devil's Fools, uh, about to burn her dress.
Okay, so now we're going out to Fall River, Massachusetts, and this is my poem about Lizzie Borden. And this is in the Devil's Fools, but it's also one of the two poems in the Devil's Fools that's also in my chapbook from Bright Hill Press, the ruined walled castle garden. And I think of this as quintessentially American because it's about an anti-hero. Lizzie is remembered as the young, beautiful axe murderer, but she wasn't convicted. So
Right. She was acquitted. Oh my God.
she was acquitted. So this takes a close look at her on that fateful day, about to burn her dress. Where has she been this sweltering day since she paused beside the horsehair armrest and interrupted Mr. Borden's nap, then glided by the kitchen where the maid was plunged into a sticky business, canning, and picked her way out to the shed? The nimbus clouds cut open, the sluice dulls her scarlet apron, crystals pitter-patter on her nose. Or is the cloudburst something that, like so much else, only her far-fetching imagination sees? Fall River slips away, the shed's wood floor, the axe, the open door. Lizzie's willowy, an orphaned flower in the yard, and done with Papa's snores from the settee. Empty eyes raised to cold heaven, she stalks the plank that keeps her long skirt from fresh puddles on her way back to the house.
It's about to burn her dress. Read and written and read by Mary Gilliland. That's so tongue in cheek, but it's so scary and wonderful. It's almost like she's walking the plank at the end, you know? She's
Yeah.
walking the plank. I also love how you say only her far-fetching imagination. And a fetch is also a witch's word, I believe.
Yes, yes.
And it's like a double, like stealing the soul, I think, or doppelganger. So I just love the inferences there. So is she another devil's fool, Mary?
Oh, well, I'm not quite sure because, she got out of any punishment.
That's true. That's
And
true.
and perhaps rightly so. We just do not know. She was one of the first, I believe, celebrities. There were reporters at that trial, and there were daily publications about it for a long time.
And her
Hmm.
house is still a museum of some kind. Now people make
Hmm.
pilgrimages to it. So
Well,
it's and the poem title belies her innocence, or could you tell about to burn her dress?
I think I would say if she burns her dress, that means she would not be innocent because it would have some sticky stuff on it. Why else would someone burn her dress?
Mm-hmm.
So, but it was an interesting thing. A poem for me is often a long process of letting the whole draft sit and then make small changes. And very often, I'm taking words out. I'm really of the poet school of it might have been Cocteau that said a poet is a writer who doesn't write, and of course, I write a lot, but a lot of my work and revising is removing things. And something I did in this poem in the very last stanza, originally it was cold eyes raised to empty heaven, she stalks the plank, because then I was attributing a certain, emotion to her.
Mhm, mhm.
But then when I changed that, I think it's those kind of switches, those kind of changes that make the poem something to return to and read again, you
Yes,
know.
and you change it to empty eyes, raised
Yes,
to cold heaven,
yes.
which implies so much more.
Mhm.
And her empty eyes, I would imagine we're talking about Lizzie Borden. Uh,
Yes.
she's almost like the adversary herself, she's sort of the devil. I'm just thinking about that. That's really
That's true. That's true. I
wonderful.
guess that's why she had to be in this book.
And your chapbook won, which contained this poem, won a contest at Bright Hill Press right here in Delaware County.
Yes, yes, that was so wonderful. I think it was like 2019. So it came out the next year, which was during the pandemic, and I was so excited to have won that award. And it's part of what they call the At Hand chapbook series. It's like in Victorian times they had the penny dreadfuls, and so
Uh-huh,
it's
uh-huh.
just like that. The chapbook is the size of a palm,
Right.
and it's affordable. It's accessible, and it's very easily held.
Yes, and Bertha Rogers, who was the head of the founder and head of Bright Hill Press, wonderful poet and visual artist. I can just see her, you know, relishing that
I think she,
description of what she does
I think she did relish that. She's still, I believe, the editor for Bright Hill.
for the contest too. I think she's very involved in.
Yes, yes.
Thank you, Mary. You're listening to Planet Poet Words in Space on WIOX Community Radio, live and local in the Catskills. I'm your host, Sharon Israel, here with my guest, award winning poet and activist, Mary Gilliland. And joining us now from Manhattan is Planet Poet's Poet at Large, poet and visual artist Pamela Marche Pierce. Grayling Press had just announced Pamela as its 2024 Artist in Residence. Congratulations, Pamela.
Thank you so much, Sharon. I really appreciate that. And being here on the show today is a wonderful way to celebrate this new event in my life. So, and Mary, I'm relishing all the edges in your poetry today. I'm just having a wonderful time with that. And thanks for reminding me about Lizzie Borden. As a very young, I was an adolescent, I was obsessed with Lizzie Borden. And in retrospect, I wonder what that meant for an only child like me, isolated in a certain way with her parents. And I kept looking at the pictures of the bloody furniture in this little book that I had and thinking about Lizzie Borden. This may come out in my own poetry, if not in my dream life or in my psychoanalysis. We don't know. So thank you, Mary.
And Mary, please feel free to join us in conversation and commentary on what Pamela's doing.
All right, I will.
That'd be great.
And Pamela, what do you have for us today?
Well, today is my third in my three-part series about copyright. So this will be the concluding session. Copyright came up as a point of interest as I had to figure out what I can do on the air and what I can't do on the air. And I learned, as you know, Sharon, certainly, and I'm sure you know, Mary, that you cannot read the whole poem of another poet just because you want to. That the rules are that it has to be either in public domain or 75 years after the death of the poet or 100 years after the publication. The definition of copyright is the exclusive legal right given to an originator or an assignee to print, publish, perform, film, or record literary, artistic, or musical material, and to authorize others to do the same. So we've been looking at that for a couple of sessions. It has a history. The idea of intellectual property goes way back to ancient Greece and to the Talmud. And as I did my research for this series, which I always love, I came up with something very unexpected and very interesting. So to bring us into this, I'm going to read you 19 words. I'm going to read it one way, and then I'm going to read it another way. And these 19 words wound up in a 36-page article in the Vanderbilt Law Review. So here are the 19 words. The red wheelbarrow, so much depends upon a red wheelbarrow glazed with rain water beside the white chickens. That's a 19-word sentence. Okay. Now, The Red Wheelbarrow by William Carlos Williams. So much depends upon a red wheelbarrow glazed with rain water beside the white chickens. One is a sentence and one is a poem. Well, why is it a poem? In 2005, Jennifer Understall wrote a 36-page article for the Vanderbilt Law Review entitled Copyright Infringement and Poetry. When is a red wheelbarrow the red wheelbarrow? And in this fascinating 36 pages, she goes around all over the legalities of issues in intellectual property infringement. And she keeps coming to the point of what is a poem? What makes a poem? Why is a poem not just the 19 words on the page? And that's what I was fascinated about in this particular article, which I recommend to anyone. There are expressive elements. She comes up with something she calls an expressive elements test to determine what makes a poem a poem. Now, in fiction and in nonfiction, when you're looking at these infringements, it's really about the similarities between two things. What pops into my mind is West Side Story and Romeo and Juliet. I mean, a very good case could be made if Shakespeare were a contemporary playwright, that there was something going on there. But with poetry, it doesn't work that way. And she tells us that we know as poets that we're working with all the time, that it's not only the words, but it's line breaks, and it's the placement on the white space. It's the punctuation. It's the way the stanzas make rhythm. And all of this, added to all of this, is meaning. And she says, I'm going to read you the opening statement that she makes in this particular article. Copyright does not protect facts or ideas, but only an author's original expression. Often, though, it is difficult to distill protected domain from unprotected ideas or facts that reside in public domain. Copyright protection for poetry is particularly problematic because a poem's ideas are often intertwined with a poem's sounds, shape, and images. And she goes on to say, and I think it's very concise, and I'm quoting all of this, the red wheelbarrow uses short lines to create a slow, thoughtful rhythm, reinforcing the poem's purpose of articulating the beauty that can be found in careful concentration on a single object. For instance, so much depends makes the reader stop, and the reader then starts and stops again with the next short line upon. The poem's lines create a slow, hypnotic rhythm. This hypnosis becomes a part of the poem's point as Williams works to make the reader stop and notice the seemingly ordinary. So as I was reading all of this, I was just having so much fun thinking about this lawyer trying to penetrate this subject. Don't you love it? And
Yes.
I thought of all these books like How Does a Poem Mean by John Chardy, which was a groundbreaker, or Rose, Where Did You Get That Red from Kenneth Koch? So she, in this particular article, what I think would be exciting to other poets is how she employs poets, the well-known poets, to help her into this particular subject. And she uses Gregory Orr, who we all know is a poet and a writer about poetry and from the New York Times. And he says, the poet Gregory Orr, he characterizes poetry as having 4 possible temperaments that affect its form: story, dramatic unity; structure, measurable patterns; music, rhythm and sounds; and imagination, the flow of an image to image or thought. So throughout this whole article, it's like everybody is spinning around this art form that is so mysterious and so hard to define and so fantastic that it keeps us going in our writing lives and on the air with Sharon every month.
Thank you, Pamela. It's great. But also, she did a gorgeous explication of that poem,
Absolutely.
of something that's not very prone or friendly to explication.
Right, exactly.
Mary,
Exactly.
Mary, go ahead.
She arrived at sort of the culmination was creating a hypnosis,
Yes.
it's a trance, and she was arguing her way towards entrancement,
Absolutely.
It's great. I also love the fact that she uses hypnosis as a legal argument for.
Right, it's all there. And I want to end with a couple, like very small part of a poem of Octavio Paz. His translator is not listed, and I'm a stickler for giving credit to translators, as those of you know me know. I'm assuming it's Elliot Weinberger who translates most of his work. And this is a very short part of it. Poetry, suspension bridge between history and truth, is not a path to this or that. It is to see the stillness in motion, change in stillness.
Wow.
Thank you, Octavio Paz.
And thank you, Pamela Moshe-Pierce, Poet at Large, for that fabulous segment.
Thank you.
I'll never look at the red wheelbarrow. I'll never think of it the same
You're
way.
not supposed to.
Again.
That's my job, to make you never look at it as the same again. So, okay.
Thank you, Pamela.
Enjoy the rest of the show. Bye-bye, Mary. Thank you. Thank you, Sharon.
Thank you, Pamela.
That was great. Mary, I wanted to ask you about your activism. It's very much entwined with your teaching and your writing. And,
it is.
And you helped create at Cornell the Knight Institute for Writing. Could you briefly describe what you did?
Oh, briefly. Well, let's see. A, B, C. One thing I did was I developed the very first interdisciplinary first-year writing seminar that Cornell offered, and this was for the department that is now Science, Technology, and Society. So my course was called Ecosystems and Egosystems. I taught it for the first time in 1984 and in Ithaca, and for the last time in 2006 in Doha at Cornell's campus over in Qatar. So that was one thing. The Knight Institute evolved as a writing in the disciplines across the curriculum. And so two other things I'll just say. I represented us overseas, delivering papers at international conferences in Greece and in the United Kingdom about the methods that we used with having writing tutors. And that was a large emphasis, besides my teaching, is I developed what was then called the Writing Walk-in Service. And so it was a one-to-one opportunity. And I spun it out so it was decentralized in about 4 campus locations. And my tutors were the best writers and conversationalists that I could interview and find. And students came, staff came, and a few faculty came while I was directing that. So
wonderful.
Yeah.
Wonderful. I mean, in 1984, to talk about ecosystems, that was fairly unusual language at the time, correct?
Yes, it was. And also the kind of questions we looked at in that course. I'm just trying to recall the course description. It was something like when business interests, the university research, and government policies converge. How can we best settle conflicts of interest? I
Mhm.
believe I taught it so many times. I think that's the first sentence of it. I could not even ask that question today because the map has changed so much that they're not seen as conflicts of interest, and so the ethical questions, they rise and they fall, and sometimes they get forgotten. Yeah. But all that time I was teaching those courses, I also taught advanced expository writing courses, and usually environmental concerns, food distribution, social justice, those would be central to the readings and the themes of the course. At
Mhm.
the same time, I always taught poetry very actively. Mary Oliver's dream work was on my syllabus,
Mhm.
and every writing course I taught the Tao Te Ching.
You did.
I did. I taught Stephen Mitchell's translation of it and a few supplementary things of Lin Yutang's 20th century translation of it. No matter who the students were, they loved it. I mean, I was shocked. Over in Doha, they loved it.
I'm sure they're still talking about it, Mary. It's so exciting. What a wonderful teacher you must be. I want to talk about your latest book that's going to be released in 2024, Ember
Uh-huh.
Days. And
Yes.
could you talk briefly about it? And I want you to read something from it, please.
Okay, well, it's Codhill Press will be my publisher again, and they're releasing the book on March 1st.
Hmm.
And Ember Days, it has poems about other historical figures, like I had one, Lizzie Borden in The Devil's Fools. In Ember Days, Virginia Woolf. It has speaks a poem, and there's also a poem about Nikola Tesla. And the themes around people in the book are the difficulties they have being part of conventional society, I would say. The term ember is from Anglo-Saxon imbrin, which means a cycle or a revolution.
Oh.
And Ember Days, traditionally, they're a Christian religious observance, not all Christian
Mm.
sects, but like the old Roman Catholic and I believe the Anglicans, they still have these on the church calendars. And there would be 3 days, Wednesday, Friday, and Saturday of Ember Week. And this would be the beginning of the new season. And
Oh,
so this is an overlay, I'm sure, on top of all the pagan observances when you would have summer solstice, or autumn equinox, So,
all the
um,
bonfires, right? And the embers. You think that's part of
yes,
it?
yes,
I've
embers.
never
And
heard of that. Thank you. My goodness.
yeah, ember also is, people feel very bleak now sometimes. And so it seems like maybe they feel the world is entering a period of, vanishing, which I don't think will happen, but
Decline, perhaps.
decline. Yeah,
And you have a beautiful poem here from the book called Infinitives. Would you read that for us, Mary?
I will. Okay. It's interesting because this poem, I began writing it in 2006 when I was teaching at Weill Cornell Medicine, Qatar. Students from so many countries. I was teaching that ecosystem and ecosystem course. Infinitives. To admit fields are on fire, oil fields, though we do not see them burning. To remember our grandparents sweltered each summer, waiting for the streetcar for nightfall. To irrigate loosened earth with native water. To bail out the seed banks. To chew our food. To call the bluff of the brand name the marketing genius. To digest resources burnt to a crisp threshold, to savor our craving to satiation, to be free of litter strewn beyond us, steering through the Hesperides, sacred groves, blessed isles, past the ghost of a man on the moon's new frontier, our course set for the destitute sunset.
Mm. That's
Mm.
Mary Gilliland reading infinitives from her forthcoming book, Ember Days, The Destitute Sunset. What beautiful language, Mary. Absolutely
Mm.
wonderful. And it's a poem about the demise. Could you talk more about it and why it's called infinitives?
Well, infinitives actually is a positive dimension, I think, of this poem, because an infinitive is a verb form that you can build on, to admit, to irrigate. You can use that as a noun. I want to write poetry. That's the object of the verb want. And so infinitives also has a musical resonance with infinite itself, and so I'm trying to I'm trying to save us if we could admit that that we're on fire, okay, that we are on fire, and all in all these different ways that we could irrigate um earth with its own water, rather than, they say the next wars will be the water wars,
Yes.
of who owns the water. All these, little things I taught actually. The whole time I was teaching, I was thinking, oh, I wish I could write poetry about this.
Mhm.
And after I retired, I did.
Yes. I love that, to irrigate, to call, to to admit. The possibilities are there.
Yes.
Goes through that language. And how would you tie the poem Infinitives with the book's title, Ember Days, Mary?
Um, this poem comes fairly early in the book, and um it's kind of at the beginning. The embers are at the end of a fire, and the in, this sort of imagery and language are kind of at the beginning. So it's like the conflagration is happening, and it's possible, actually to put it out at this point, and actually set a course and look at that sunset and say, are we going to get there, and are we going to make it not destitute?
Hmm.
So,
Mary, could you talk about the Blessed Isles, the
oh,
Hesperides? Where are they?
well, the Hesperides, I love to work with legends and myths, and the Hesperides were Greek nymphs. They were called clear-voiced maidens who guard the tree of golden apples.
Ah,
So the Trojan War started with one of those golden apples. I think Aphrodite got one of them and threw it to Paris, and then that tree is also guarded by a dragon on their island. And the Garden of the Hesperides, it's a paradise. It's like Eden. The Blessed Isles are, that's what the Celtic people would refer to. They have all these stories about voyages, great voyages on the great sea, right? And the Blessed Isles were always out in the west where the sunset was.
ah,
And the souls were there, all those who had gone before. It was a very treasured place in the mental map of their cosmology.
yeah,
Yeah.
Tolkien uses that, I guess, in the Western, the departure of the elves, I think.
Yes, he does. Yes, he does. They go west.
They
That's the
do.
tradition.
They
I
do.
guess in this country we don't go that way. Well, I guess we go west for other things.
Thank you, Mary. I wanted to ask you if our listeners are interested in you and your books, where would
Mhm.
they go for information, Mary?
Well, my website is marygilliland.com. Gilliland. And you can see a lot of my poetry there. You can listen to a lot of it. There's a page for each one of my books. And also there's a contact form at marygilliland.com where you can ask me a question, or invite me to give a reading or, ask me to sign a book or whatever. So I'd love to hear from anybody listening or anybody who's read the books.
Thank you, Mary.
Oh, and Codhill is distributed through SUNY Press,
Okay.
actually. Yeah.
Oh, can't wait till it comes out.
Thanks.
Mary, we have a couple of more minutes. Would you read another poem from the Devil's Fools?
Oh, right. I just want to mention that other one, Infinitives, that was also in the chapbook from Bright Hill Press. You picked out two poems that were from
it must be the Delaware
only
County.
two poems in the Devil's Fools.
It must be the Delaware County connection.
All right. So this is larger than life. It's really about mushrooms, but it is also a riff on cinema. And so there are italicized quoted language, and I'll read them in a funny voice, in a little voice, so that listeners can distinguish them. Larger than life. Get you, my pretty. Have what she's having. Red pill or blue pill. Together and blow. The greatest actors have no ideas of their own. They're like the caps we love, sliced raw with spinach or fried in butter. Slight pressure from the teeth on the omelet's fungal fruit as we bite without much or any thought to the mycelium net beneath the ground. Its tremendous job of organizing life on this planet. Frankly, my dear, nobody's perfect. Round up the usual suspects. Mushrooms concentrate nutrition. Mushrooms consume substances toxic to other life. They come up and see us sometime.
That's Mary Gilliland reading her poem Larger Than Life. I got most of those references. I love it, and the mycelium contrast is very funny. Actually, it's wonderfully funny. Thank you, Mary Gilliland. It has been such a pleasure to have you on the show, and it's been wonderful. And thank you, Pamela Moshe Pierce, and thank you all for listening. Bye.
Sharon, thank you. You're the greatest host.
Oh, thanks so much.
And Pamela has enlightened me and reminded me of John Ciardi's wonderful book, which I still have since high school.